rejection. You spilled coffee on me, and I still looked amazing during the breakout talkback Q&A. So, I think it's time for me to move on. I've got a great resume, and I absolutely crush it in interviews, okay? Let's make this a clean break. Shift the paradigm. The only thing I ask is that you think outside the box here and do this. Take me to Goodwill, where I can really make a difference.
Your donations to Goodwill create new jobs, training programs, and education assistance for people in your community. To find your nearest donation center, go to goodwill.org. Donate stuff. Create jobs. A message from Goodwill and the Ad Council.
Welcome back. You're listening to The Secrets of Success. I'm your host, Bill Horan, and today we're speaking with Benjamin Hardy, author of Willpower Doesn't Work. Ben, you had an interesting anecdote in your book about a story of you and a Dr. Nate Lambert. Could you tell us that story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was going to school, trying to get into graduate school, and basically what I had learned is that the only way to get into high-tier PhD programs in psychology is that you had to have lots of research experience. Obviously, you had to have a good score on the GRE and good grades, but the main thing that they were looking for was lots of research experience. And so throughout my undergrad, I researched with tons of different professors. I think I worked with like 4 or 5 other professors, dedicated hundreds of hours to research, and worked on pretty common studies, that undergrads would work on. And there's just a bunch of assistants, and the goal is obviously that one of those, research studies culminates in a paper that then could be submitted for publication. And that's really kind of the goal, is when you can start getting publications or even papers submitted for publication, it looks really good on your resume, and that kind of quote-unquote sets you apart when you're applying. Well, in hundreds of hours of research under all these different professors, I never actually had the opportunity to work on a paper because most of the studies that we did never really made it that far. And so I ended up being rejected to graduate school, even though I thought I had a lot of, I had great grades. I had like a 3.8, had a pretty good GRE score, but just my research experience was lacking, even though I spent all this time. And so after getting rejected, I decided to stop working with all the mentors that I had because obviously something wasn't working, and I started looking for a mentor in different departments. And I found a young professor who was really ambitious, and he was publishing a lot of papers. And he told me that he would let me work with him. And the first thing he did was actually give me a paper that was sitting kind of like, quote-unquote, dusty on his desk, just sitting there. He hadn't touched it for a long time. And he said, if you take some time and clean up this paper, we'll submit it for publication and see what happens. And so that was the very first assignment he gave me, was he gave me an old paper and he told me to clean it up. And so I spent about 40 hours working on it, and he liked what he saw, and so he submitted it for publication. And immediately, within 1 week of meeting this person, I was in a totally advanced position than I was after 3 years of working with 6 professors. And Dr. Lambert and I ended up becoming really close friends. And, I was super motivated in that situation to work with, and we ended up actually submitting over 15 papers for publication in 6 months. And we ended up becoming really close friends, accountability partners. He would do one-on-one coaching sessions with me, and he helped me become a really good writer, and he taught me how to be more ambitious in my life. And so what that experience taught me, kind of going back to some of the ideas we've already talked about, is that you rise or fall to the expectations of those around you. And he had a much higher expectation, and he also gave a lot more hands-on mentoring, and it changed my life. And it kind of goes back to this idea that no amount of willpower is going to be able to do, is not going to open up certain doors for you when the situation just can't give it to you. I could have exerted more and more willpower with my other professors, but they just simply couldn't offer me the same thing that Nate Lambert did. And so, your environment is very influential in your possibilities. It's kind of like our foster kids. No amount of willpower could have provided them the opportunities that they've had while living with us. We've been to over 30 of the United States. They're in Montessori school. They're doing a lot of great things, and they could have tried hard in their situation, but ultimately they would have adapted to it, which is what they had done. And so, that story is just kind of a case study example of the fact that who you are is really dependent on who you're around.
Now, you also mentioned, you say you design the worldwide view by proactively shaping external inputs. For the rest of us, so we can get on that trail to success and get it moving, how do we do this? Where do we start? Can you give us either a plan or an example?
Yeah, will you repeat the question one more time?
Sure. You mentioned that we design our view by proactively shaping external inputs. How do we do that? What's an external input that we could have control over?
Yeah, well, I mean, this interview right now is an external input, for the people who are listening to this. You know what I mean? And so basically anything external coming in is information, experiences, food, music, people. It's all the stuff that goes in that shapes your worldview and shapes your experiences. Your brain is very fluid and adaptable. It's very, they call it plastic. And so basically your brain is very changeable, and it actually syncs up with the people around you automatically. And so your brain is always changing. And so if you want to if you want to proactively decide who you want to be, you need to shape very consciously what comes in. Garbage in or garbage out is what they say in psychology. If you let garbage information in, garbage food in, garbage all this stuff in, then your psychology and your brain is going to turn into weeds. It's just like letting a garden, do nothing. It'll grow weeds.
That's a great analogy, except that we're dealing with our life now, and it's while the garden is important to a lot of us, our life, our success, our careers, you're hitting right at the heart of what we do every day. Ben, again, I'd like our audience to know, if you didn't catch it before, our guest today is Benjamin Hardy. He's the author of Willpower Doesn't Work. He's going to fill you in on where we can get the book and the website where you can learn more.
Yeah, so you can get the book anywhere books are sold, whether that's Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You could also go to willpowerdoesn'twork.com. And if you want to join a competition that ends on June 6th, you can, increase that motivation. And basically what the competition is you've got to sign up for the competition, which is free, but then you've got to buy the book, and you've got until June 6th to apply the book and change your life. And the person who changes their life the most is actually going to win a Tesla for free.
So for the price of the book, we can change our lives and win a Tesla. That sounds like a pretty good raffle.
Yeah, it is. It's obviously you've got to perform. It's not a lottery, but for the person who actually, uses the book and changes their life and then demonstrates that they did, we want to reward you for that. And so, yeah.
Again, we'll give this once more before the end of the show, so if you didn't get any of that key information, we'll ask Ben to provide it right before the show concludes. Ben, you also mentioned to people that if you don't shape your environment, it will shape you. So in other words, I guess if we don't take control, we're just going. It's like kind of coming in with the tide. We're just going to go wherever the ocean sends us.
Yep. So there's a quote from Dr. Marshall Goldsmith. He wrote the book Triggers, and he said, if we do not create and control our environment creates and controls us. And this kind of goes back to some views that Charles Darwin presented. Basically, he said that there's two forms of evolution. You can, one form of evolution is called natural or organic evolution, and that's what happens when some form of species or living things just adapts to changes that happen in the environment. It's very reactive and it's very random. It's unplanned and you just don't know where it's going. And then there's domesticated evolution, where you actually create and control an environment for very specific purposes. Whether that, if you think about like race horses, for example, you need to shape, the situation so that you can actually get specific traits. If you want to grow big mushrooms, for example, you need to actually get the right soil. So the idea is just, if you want to consciously and proactively evolve or become specific, develop yourself in a specific way, you have to shape the environment that will allow you to be that. Because the truth is, you're going to adapt to an environment, whether that's the environment you choose or whether that's the environment you just fall into. And so, one way or another, you're going to be shaped by an environment. The only way to actually consciously decide who you'll be is to shape the environment that will shape you. And Winston Churchill basically said the same thing. He said, we shape our house, and then our house shapes us.
Now, Ben, I told you before the show, I enjoyed a little anecdote you put in about another friend named Nate, but he was a car salesman. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, he was actually a real estate salesman.
Real estate, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. So Nate was working as a real estate salesman, and in that field, image is kind of important because you're, especially if you're selling information products like he was too. He was selling coaching programs to help people become better at selling, and he was actually really good at selling. He was making a lot of money, but at the same time, he was also kind of limited because his image didn't portray confidence in the people he was with, and so he kind of capped his own ability. He drove around in a really kind of beat up car, even though he could afford something better. And in most careers, it probably doesn't matter what car you drive, but when you're driving people around, and you've got to kind of create this confidence in people. What he ended up doing, so he drove like a really used up like Toyota Camry, and it was one of those junky ones. And if you're driving people around in your car, for a living, and you're showing them to big fancy houses and stuff, it just wasn't doing it for him. So what he decided to do is he just decided to make one change in his environment. He bought a Tesla, actually, kind of ironically with the competition we're doing, but he bought a Tesla, and he said within a month his sales quadrupled because it just changed how people saw him. Like when they got in his car and he was driving them around to buy a house, and it kind of changed how he carried himself as well. And the psychology basically says there's a meta-analysis on confidence, and what it says is that confidence is not what creates success. It's actually successful behavior that creates confidence. And so once he had this car that he was driving in that he had invested himself in, and once he started selling more houses and people showed him more respect, he felt more confident, and it led to more success. And within a very short period of time, he became the top salesman in the state. A lot of it was just because he literally just bought a new car and changed his environment. He made that tweak, and it changed how people viewed him, and it changed how he viewed himself.
Ben, we want to thank you. The time goes much too quickly when we have a guest that's as much fun as you are. The book is called Willpower Doesn't Work by our guest, Benjamin Hardy. Ben, would you give us the website once again?
Yeah, willpowerdoesn'twork.com, and that's where you can sign up to win a Tesla.
Easy enough to remember, and we all want to win that car. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'd like to remind our audience that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.